Welcome to our fourth season of Life's Journey with Dr. Ralph Smith. And of course, I'm Dr. Ralph Smith. This is a very special occasion for us as we move into our fourth season of the show. First of all, this is the first show that we have shot with our wonderful friends here at Thurston Community Media and their wonderful studios. And this is a tremendous facility, and we want to thank them for allowing us to use them in the studios. But I wanted to share with you the subject matter. This is one of those shows that I generally would put a disclaimer on. But in this particular show, I think the benefit for the whole family is more important. And what our focus is going to be on is life management. Ginny Marie Wellness has been around since 2008 in Idaho. And then in 2014, we opened our centers up in Port Angeles and La Push and Forks and now Olympia here in Washington. So we apply the life management program to both locations. And I want to take a little bit of time and explain why that's so important. No matter what your situation may be, whether it's a court-ordered program, which we do a lot of those programs, or if it's general therapy, or whatever the case might be, life management is a more important issue now than it's ever been before. With all the stressors that we have facing between the economy, the continuing plague, as I call it. I know people say COVID, but the plague, and all the different things that are occurring in educational fields with schools being closed, there's a lot of pressures on the family unit and on the individuals. Teenagers are feeling this effect more than anybody else as they strive forward to get their separate identity. And while you have all this turmoil occurring within families, people are looking for answers. They have questions they want answered, and they need that neutral third party to come in and give them guidance and give them suggestions on what they should do in making their lives happier and perhaps more successful. And that's what life management is all about. It's about managing your life with a life coach or a therapist or a doctor, whatever the case might be, and taking good paths. And I say paths with an S because there's multiple paths you need. And it kind of slips into the cognitive process too. But it means that when you're looking at a problem or a challenge, as we like to call it, one of the basic things you do is you get a piece of paper out and you write the decision you need to make. Let's say it's a decision to move and you want to relocate, let's say halfway across the country. And on one side of the paper, you write the positives of the move. And on the other side of the paper, you write the negatives. And then when you go to make this decision, whether it be for yourself personally or for the whole family, you can look at both sides of the spectrum and decide indeed if this is really important to you. Where people make mistakes, and we've talked about it in previous shows, is they make reactionary decisions. Reactionary decisions is something that is maybe a 1 in 4 chance of having the correct answer. It generally means that the issue has not been well developed or thought about, and all the different alternatives looked at. And so it can get to be rather tricky to make good decisions on that. And that's where life management comes into play. So in today's program, we're going to talk about the different life factors that it can affect you and why it's important for you to look at this show and with a good piece of paper there and a pen that hopefully won't run out of ink and really address issues together and work together as a family unit. Now, there's some basic units when we talk about family units I want to explain. We have family units now that are blended family units, which means sometimes the partner brings in children of their own, and then they bring in children of the other partner. And then they have what we call a blended family, where they might conceive children within that relationship. So you have 3 contrasting factors all working together. And it affects the children especially because their self-worth and self-esteem is built on that basis of who am I, how do I play in the equation. So when you look at life management, the first thing you do is you look at the family unit and you break out what are the important priorities for the family unit that need to be addressed. Now, what I suggest very strongly, and again, we've talked about this in previous shows, is I think it's very important to have a family council meeting with families. And what that means is that one day a week, preferably after dinner before a lot of things get going on, and a lot of people choose Monday nights, is the family sits down and discuss what's going to occur in the upcoming week. It could be simple priorities, for example, going to soccer practice or a wrestling match or a tennis match, whatever the case might be. It could be a matter of planning out a weekend trip, maybe that trip off to some national park that you hadn't counted on. Or it may also include things like vacation times and things like that. But every voice in that family unit needs to be equal. And by that I mean ages 8 all the way up to 18 plus. So that's one factor. The second factor is the professional impact. You know, when I've practiced for over 32 years. And the one thing I hear, no matter what state I'm practicing in or what Jenny Marie Center I'm practicing in, is the kids have one common complaint. And the common complaint is dad or mom, or in some cases both, they don't seem to have time for me. They're always busy. They always got other things on their mind. And they're not to be disturbed, perhaps. And that is really poor leadership on the fact of the family unit. The family unit has to stress the fact that every voice needs to be heard. And so one of the things that you do is on the professional side. For example, let's say if one side of the partnership has a chance to get a big promotion, but you have to relocate to San Francisco. And let's say you live in the LA area. That is a big issue, because picking up a family and moving a family is not a matter of just moving and buying another house. It could be changing churches, changing friends, changing restaurants. I mean, there are so many factors involved when you pick up a family and you move it. And so it's very important to look at the professional impact that it might have. Do you have a secure job? Do you work for yourself? A lot of these jobs now have changed to where people work out of their homes. Is that good or is that bad? In some ways it's good because you avoid that trip of driving into the office, but it's bad in the fact the job never leaves the house. So when do you get the relief from getting away from the job? Can you just simply turn off a phone? These are complicated questions you've got to ask yourself. So the professional impact is very, very important. The final impact that you got to look at is the spiritual impact. When I do premarital counseling with people, it's an issue that is generally avoided by a lot of therapists, but to me is very important. Because if you have a strong spiritual belief in whatever religion you may have, it does impact the family, especially if that spiritual belief contrasts with your partner. And that again leaves the kids in confusion. I see a lot of this happening in relationships that perhaps one partner is Jewish and the other partner is Protestant. As you would think, well, it's the same God you believe in, but that's the delivery of that God is different. But it's a lot more than that. It's the culture and heritage that goes along with it. In fact, what church service do you go to? What impact do you have with the rabbi or the pastor or the reverend? These are all external factors that can affect your family unit. And that's why it's so important to talk about those things ahead of time. I'm not saying at all in either premarital counseling or in these family counseling units that we have with Life Management that everybody has to have the same religion or the same spiritual beliefs. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying to you is if there are differences, if there are contrasts that are going to create problems with the family unit, those need to be discussed in advance. For example, baptism of children. A lot of times parents take the attitude, it doesn't matter what the kids think. They're going to be baptized because that's the way I was baptized when I was young. But that's a huge development in someone's spiritual growth, especially if you're in the post-puberty stage where you really don't know what you want to do in your life or what you want to plan. But you got to have that discussion. It's critical. So once again, when you review it, you have the personal, you have the professional, you have the family, and you have the spiritual. And once you cover all those areas, whether you do it in a family council meeting or you do it on a car trip, whatever the case might be, then you're ready to start laying out your life management going forward. And going forward and having a positive result that everybody can deal with. When we return from this short break, we're going to talk about accountability, of how do you hold someone accountable for these things. A lot of people discuss it in the form of New Year's resolutions. It goes far beyond that. Accountability is the measuring stick in a relationship and in a family relationship especially. So we're going to talk about accountability right after this break. Welcome back from that short break. And I wanted us to take that short break because I'm hoping that in this conversation we're having in this particular life journey, that you're making yourself some very good notes. And once again, you don't need to do this alone. If you want to give us a call at Ginny Marie Wellness, you can reach us in our Idaho and California number at 208-562-7050. If you happen to reside in Oregon or Washington, you can reach us at 360-809-3444. Just in case you need some help there, you can give us a call. We had talked about accountability when we first broke for that break. And by accountability, it comes down to a very simple format. And the format is having a game plan. You know, most folks know that if you're involved in business or you're involved even with a volunteer group or whatever the case might be, a lot of time a game plan can just be priorities or objectives, or they call them focus points. And then everybody has that list of focus points and everybody does their input. Well, family needs the same thing, except what we refer to it there as is a game plan. There needs to be a game plan of what is the final result that you want to do, who's going to take responsibility to get there, and that can be assigned to different family members. And 3, how are you going to measure that? Are you going to measure it by total success or partial success? Now, to develop a game plan, it gets back to what we talked about earlier about how you're approaching this, whether it's family, professional, family, again, is the critical one. I want to re-emphasize that, or the spiritual angle. Well, the bottom line is for a game plan is that you take a look at it, and instead of planning out for a whole year, what you want to do is you want to plan for it in quarters. In other words, 3 months at a time. And what you want to do is you want to list what needs to be accomplished in the next 3 months. Are you approaching vacation time? If you are, then that is a worthy subject to discuss and get the impact of everybody as far as their input and get the full impact of that. Do you want to do Disney World? Do you want to do Knott's Berry Farm? Is it Magic Mountain? Or is it simply a drive up and down the coast of California on Highway 1? Whatever the case might be, is to get a general consensus. It's not that you have to vote on it and have everybody in agreement, but that's how you come up with your game plan. You could end up looking at it financially. You know, one of the things that we did, and we worked this out with the children, we won several awards on this, is we have Rewards Plus, where we would establish a list of special duties and duties that, quite frankly, you would expect your kids to do, not chores, but that you would expect your kids to do to get, quote, extra credit. And a mom and a dad would sit down, hopefully, in a situation where they list all these things. And then they'd put a point value of getting them completed, and they hand them a coupon. And the coupon that they get handed, they can turn those coupons in at a later date for the rewards. And the rewards could be a sleepover. The rewards could be a new video game. It could be almost anything. But then you have to look at it this way. And this is the tricky part. It teaches kids to save. Because if they wanted to go to that amusement park, and let's say you put a value of 100 tickets on it, it teaches them to delay gratification until they save up those 100 tickets. Or do they prefer instant gratification? You know, getting a video game or whatever the case might be. I'm just giving you hypothetical examples. So when you come up with a game plan, have that built into it to where the kids are actively involved. And why do we have the kids actively involved? And you might say, well, Dr. Ralph, my kid's 7 years old. Why should he have as much say as a sister who's 16? And the answer is real simple. You're modeling behavior. You're taking an example of teaching kids while they're young to effectively manage their lives. So when they have their own families, and they might be too embarrassed to go to old mom and old dad and ask their advice, they've been modeled by behavior that you've exhibited. And that's what a game plan serves its role. The other thing that's very important is understand if you're going to use a life coach or an advisor or a therapist or a doctor, there's a lot of different titles involved here. What role should they play? Should they play a leading role where they actually get these lists of subjects and lead a discussion through all these subjects? And one of the things that's important as they do that is like an intervention. Do they take such a leadership role that they're making decisions? I don't think so. I think that a good therapist, a good life coach, a good doctor, or what advisor, whatever the case might be, is there to guide the discussion, to make sure that if people get off subject, they bring them back into the subject at hand. So their role is more of guiding the subject than it is making decisions on the subject. Anytime you require a doctor, a therapist, advisor, whatever title you want to use to make decisions for you, and it happens. I've had patients come up to me and say, Dr. Ralph, what would you do if this was you? And I politely answer back, I really can't answer that question because we may come from different backgrounds. We may have different priorities. So what's important is what things can you do to give you a happier life and to get back on that road to happiness. And the way you get to that road to happiness is to have a therapist, a life coach, advisor, a doctor guide you toward the conclusion. Not lead you into the conclusion, guide you. And there is a difference. Now, the other issue that's just as important, and I wanted to talk about, is the accountability side. Let's say that you come up with a game plan and you have all of it laid out nice. You've got the kids contributing. You've got both partners contributing. Everything is on message. If you don't have accountability, what good does it do to have a game plan? In other words, the measurement has to be there for you on a game plan. If your goal is to have greater financial security, then as you spend money going through a fast food drive-through restaurant, let's say, or go out to dinner, or go out and order a bunch of pizzas or whatever the case might be, the credibility of that whole decision is based, can you afford it? Can you teach your kids budgeting is very important. And one way that I have guided people in making those decisions, and again, I say guide, is I say, look, you have core expenses that you have to meet. Rent, mortgage, utilities, fuel for the car, a certain amount of money put aside for car repairs when they do break down, a car payment if you have a car payment. Whatever, these are core expenses that you can put on a piece of paper and you know they stay the same regardless of what month you may be in or whatever the case might be. And then you have what you call discretionary expenses. And generally a rule of thumb is you take 10 to 20% of your overall funds that you have coming in your home and you leave those as discretionary. You don't have to spend those monies every single month. In fact, they can accumulate, much like we talked about with Rewards Plus, with kids keeping their coupons. But the important thing is the money is there so that you're not doing something that you have to trim somewhere along the line in your groceries, let's say, or whatever the case might be. Or dad yelling at you, hey, let's keep that thermostat at a reasonable temperature, whatever the case might be. Those core subjects and the core values and core expenses, they should remain unchanged as much as possible. So the accountability part of this, which I think is so critical, is if you have a result, you have a net income of an outcome. Income, outcome, same thing. Your outcome is your final summary event, and your income is money. It is very hard to manage money if you don't have a game plan or if you don't have a budget. Now, there are some among us that are watching this show now that makes sums of money, they don't need to worry about a budget perhaps in their own mind. They think, I got the money there, I make it, I work hard for it, we can spend whatever we want. And yet those kind of people are the people that get in the most trouble, because then they get real panicky if they're running short of funds. They may decide that they need to have a minimum of $500 in their checking account, and then they get down to $200 and they get real nervous. There are some people that think, boy, if I've got $100 left in that checking account, it's been a great month, and they're very happy about that. But the reality is money does drive decisions. So the budgeting is the accountability. And at the end of the month, if you meet all these expenses and you meet all these outcomes that you want, you've had a successful month. And a successful month can become a successful quarter, a 3-month period. You know, my father, he's no longer with us, but he taught me a very valuable lesson when I was a young man. He said, Ralph, it's not a matter of how much money you make. It's what you have left over after you pay your bills. And he says, a lot of people don't think of it that way. You can manage a budget by your expenses as well as you can manage a budget by having income. And this is especially true of hourly workers, who they might get some overtime because of various reasons. And they get used to that overtime money. In a lot of cases, it's time and a half. And then all of a sudden, when there's no overtime hours, then they've got a real shock in their budgeting. So how do they avoid that? They work their budgets and they work their accountability based on their 40 hours a week or 35 hours a week, whatever it is. And then that extra money becomes available for that discretionary expense. So to recap, accountability is to have a good plan that addresses all the life issues of whether, again, it's personal, professional, spiritual, or family, but a good game plan. Second of all, before you make a decision on that game plan subjects, you have a pro and con, a positive and negative of having that subject. And you list that on each side of your paper. You're going to save yourself $200 an hour hiring some psychologist to do this for you. You can do it yourself. You don't need anybody to do that for you. And then once you get that established, you get that done, then the accountability is, where do I want to find myself on the last day of the month, both financially and for outcome? And if you establish that well enough, then you clearly have a game plan. And a game plan gives you a happier life. It'll remove a lot of the stress of a life, which is what a lot of people need life management for, is their stress factors. It removes a lot of other issues that perhaps that family unit will face. And it also opens up dialogue so that each family member once a week knows that they're all going to sit down and talk about where they're heading the next week. And it makes the kids feel a lot more responsible. And you need to listen to them. And I'm not saying as a parent, and I'm talking to all you parents out there, that a kid brings up an idea that's your son or your daughter, or whatever the case might be. Oh, that's stupid. That doesn't make any sense. That's not input. That's criticism. What I'm talking about is if Johnny or Mary come up with a suggestion for a vacation, let's say, and they say, I want to go to Disneyland. And you know in your own heart that Disneyland tickets run $125 a day. You know the hotels probably run $150, $200 a day. And if you fly, you've got airfare. If you drive, you've got the car issue of the length of time you're on the road. There are a lot of factors to consider, and you would be better served to discuss those with your children and let them give you input on what to do and when to do it. Not that you're going to let them make the decision, but that they provide input. Accountability is like anything else in life. If you work for a company and the company has a business plan, you generally will find that a company judges its success and its relationship with stockholders even on the final results of what the year has been compared to their budget. And all I am suggesting to you is through the use of life management as a guiding force, not a leading source, but a guiding source, and positive input from your family members, that you can develop a game plan that you can be proud of also. And then at the end of the year, it becomes almost a secondary decision because you know you've got a year in your pocket that you've done well, you've met your budget requirements, you've met your family requirements as far as the interpersonal relationships, and you know that you feel good about yourself. Because when you feel good about yourself, then you've created a situation where you will be on that road for happiness. And really, when you get right down to it, isn't that what life's all about? It's not about how much money you make. It's not about the fact of what position you may hold in your company. It has nothing to do with the fact of what kind of car you drive or how fancy of a house you have. It's that family unit that you created, they work together as one. And they come out of this whole environment, this whole game plan, as saying, I had a piece of that. And they feel much more mature about their life decisions, even a 7, 8-year-old kid, because you're giving the child structure. And that's what being a parent's all about. It's giving structure to your family members so they know the right path to take when you're planning your game plan. And once you get your game plan done and you have your accountability and you have your life coach, whatever degree it may be, from a doctor to an advisor to a therapist, you have all the pieces to the puzzle. And the puzzle is your happiness and the happiness of those you care most about, the ones you love. And you'll never know that you've done a good job on this until you wake up like what Linda and I have done on holidays. And it could be Thanksgiving, it could be Christmas. When you look out there and you see your grandkids playing, and you see your kids parenting these kids, either to be quiet or get this or get that, and you start looking at this and you say to yourself, just like Linda and I did, you know, if we never met together in high school, none of this would have happened. And it gives you a feeling of completeness to where you really feel good about life and what you're trying to accomplish. And it's really funny because the kids will claim, boy, you were so strict growing up than when I was growing up. And you watch your kids doing the same thing with your grandkids. And that's what life's all about. Thank you for tuning in to Life's Journey, and we look forward to talking to you again next week.